Before Need for Speed Underground 2 took import tuner racing into the open world, EA's future rival and Rockstar were the first to do so at the start of the 6th console generation. What started as a spiritual successor to a beloved PC racing series called Midtown Madness evolved into an iconic open-world racer that would beat NFS at its own game by the end. And it didn't need to create its own cities to do so. Ahoy there! Examining fictionalized versions of real places and games is always an interesting topic to look at. And while these places do exist in the world of Midnight Club, you'll find that they're truncated versions of the real deal. So this time, we'll explore the maps of the Midnight Club series and stack them up to their real-world counterparts. What monuments survived the transition, and will these maps help you navigate the real deal? Our first stop is where it all began. It's New York City, home of Rockstar Games. If we're judging by map size, the first game's iteration of New York City is nowhere near as big as the Big Apple. This can be forgiven because, 1, the game was a launch title for the PS2 in the US, and 2, it has more in common with Midtown Madness than Need for Speed given the history of Rockstar San Diego and Angel Studios. From the start, you can spot some of the most memorable landmarks in the city. More infamously, you start from the former World Trade Center towers, as this game came out in 2000 before the towers fell. Also visible are the following: Times Square, Central Park, though it's cut in half, the Empire State Building, the Chrysler Building, the Flatiron Building, and the Statue of Liberty, albeit as a flat silhouette. You can also spot subway stations, but you can't drive into them. Need I remind you, this is not Midtown Madness. If you were also looking for sports venues, you'd be disappointed, since Madison Square Garden and Yankee Stadium are nowhere to be found. But you know what? I'm not a New Yorker. F the Yankees. If we compare map sizes by centering it at Central Park, I would estimate Midnight Club's New York to be about 35% as big as the Big Apple. Not only is Manhattan Island cut in half, but it ignores almost everything past the north side of Central Park. Plus, there's no way off of Manhattan. Not only does this rob the player of seeing much of, if any part of Harlem, but that also means there's no way to get to Yankee Stadium. Oh yeah, you can't even access the Brooklyn or Manhattan bridges. I would say New York and Midnight Club street racing does a decent job of evoking NYC, but you're more likely to recognize the city based on its landmarks due to the smaller map. We head across the pond to the first game's version of London. For most of these maps we're covering, you'll notice a recurring theme that they're nowhere near as big as the real cities they're based on. While set upon the River Thames, the river has a curvature similar but not quite a match to the real river. You can, however, cross the Tower Bridge, unlike in New York. So we know that Tower Bridge made it into this map, but what other parts of London got in? There's Buckingham Palace, Big Ben, the London Eye, Canary Wharf, and Piccadilly Circus. Found roaming the streets are the familiar London cabs and the red double-decker buses. Oh, and the red phone boxes. It wouldn't be London without them. And if you're wondering, the Egg hadn't been built in 2000. What you will miss out on is riding the Underground, just like being unable to ride the rails in New York. Just remember to mind the gap. If we compare the maps using the River Thames as a focal point, we can see that most of the city center is used. However, the overall map is smaller than I first estimated. It's about 40% of the City of London, with 5% of Canary Wharf thrown in. It's a little slice of London where you might be able to navigate parts of the city center, Gov. Midnight Club 2 upped the ante by adding more cars, more difficulty, and one more city compared to the first game. This brings us back stateside for this game's version of Los Angeles, home of the Lakers. Alright, hold your horses, we'll get to Midnight Club Los Angeles soon enough. LA serves as the starting point for the main campaign of Midnight Club 2. You'll find yourself driving around, unsurprisingly, a truncated version of the City of Angels. Familiar landmarks include the LA River, LAX, and the Hollywood sign. Also, did you know the Hollywood sign has to be licensed for use in media? Speaking of Hollywood, the Hollywood Hills serve as one lip of the content bowl. You can't go around the hill. Nor can you get her living in Beverly Hills, since, well, you can't go to Beverly Hills. In fact, the entire map of LA in this game takes quite a few creative liberties. The LA River doesn't bend around as sharply as it does in the real world, and that Hollywood is significantly further away from the city center. Also, no sports stadiums. No Dodger Stadium, and no, arenas formerly known as Staples Center. Trying to center this map on the city center, I estimate this quote-unquote Los Angeles to be about 20% the size of the real thing. Midnight Club 2's Los Angeles will probably leave you scratching your head if you're trying to navigate it, either in-game or IRL, but this will be an interesting point of comparison when we revisit LA later on. On to Paris. The second of MC2's 3 cities is the capital of France. Appropriately, you have Peugeot police cars harassing you while listening to French House. And once again, not to sound like a broken record, this game's version of Paris is nowhere near as big, yada yada, blah blah blah. While I had a hard time pinpointing different landmarks and points of interest around LA, Paris is more faithful to the real thing. Mind you, I've never been to Paris, or most of these cities I'm talking about today. In Paris, you will find the Eiffel Tower, obviously, the River Seine, the Notre Dame before its fire and resurrection, Arc de Triomphe, and the Louvre. Now, if you combine this city with the Frenchy soundtrack, you've got a city that feels almost like one in the Midtown Madness games. Funnily enough, Midtown Madness 3 on Xbox featured Paris as one of its cities. However, Angel Studios didn't make that because they were too busy getting bought by Rockstar to become Rockstar San Diego. That game was made by DICE. Yes, the same DICE behind Battlefield. Anyway, Midnight Club 2's Paris also has the catacombs, allowing drivers to go underground as an alternate route. It seems like something the developers might have wanted to do in the original game since the subway and London Underground were both inaccessible. But then again, you're not riding the rails when traversing the underside of Paris. Finally, as a border, the Boulevard Périphérique encircles the map, although it's nowhere near as big. If we center the maps around the Louvre, the game version of Paris is about 30% the size of the city. For a small approximation, it bears a greater resemblance to its real-life inspiration. Its density is more proportionally accurate, as in, you'll find the Eiffel Tower and the Arc de Triomphe in their relative locations. That said, I'd avoid going to Paris in real life for the time being. Unless you live in Paris, in which case you're screwed. The last major city in MC2 is the biggest one in regards to real life. Tokyo, the capital city of Japan. Or at least a small slice of it. Sure, I may be repeating myself, but you have to understand that Tokyo is massive. We're talking around 847 square miles. In this small piece of the last megalopolis, you'll find Shibuya Shopping District, Tokyo Tower, the Rainbow Bridge, and Tokyo Imperial Palace. There's also trains in the city. Remember, the original game didn't have any accessible railways. But Tokyo more than makes up for it because there are 4 trains, as well as a massive tram system. If you compare them to the cities in the following game, it's larger than all of them combined. And on the topic of Midnight Club 3, Tokyo was brought back in the Remix release with its own separate campaign. This also featured Nissan Skyline GTRs as cop cars, where its MC2 incarnation featured unlicensed Nissan 300ZXs as cop cars. Same deal with LA Remix on PSP. It returns in the handheld entry mainly because it shared the same tech as Midnight Club 3, but I'm getting ahead of myself. If we center the map on Tokyo Tower, we can see that it's not even close to matching the size of real Tokyo. It's less than 20% of the entire city. Again, Tokyo is huge. Despite being a small fraction of a massive city, Tokyo in the Midnight Club series is a fan-favorite city and one that would reappear in the series twice. But make no mistake, Tokyo will kick your ass.
You almost killed me.
We move to Midnight Club 3 and its more domestic selection of cities. The 3 cities picked for Dub Edition are all American, starting with the 619 area code, San Diego, home of the Padres, as well as Angel Studios / Rockstar San Diego. I bet the team had a blast bringing their hometown to life. Anyway, San Diego is where MC3 kicks off, and it's one damn fine place to start the game. You've got Petco Park, Naval Base San Diego, the San Diego Trolley, San Diego Convention Center, and Balboa Park. There's also an amusement park that may or may not be Belmont Park since it's located far away from the city center in real life. And of course you can ride the rails at the amusement park. You can also drive on top of the aircraft carrier at the naval base. San Diego and MC3 is about the same size map as the other maps in the series, with a 35% representation of the real city. But it's missing most of the area between the city center and Belmont Park, including the airport. It's one of the easier cities to navigate in the series, but this is Midnight Club we're talking about. It's not gonna be a walk in the park. Next, we move to the hotbed of southern hip-hop, Atlanta. Home to artists like Outkast, Ludacris, and Lil Jon, ATL serves as the second city in MC3. How appropriate given its culture of customization. Atlanta also happens to be the most vertical city in the game, containing more jumps and ramps than both San Diego and Detroit. At least that's what I've noticed. Atlanta plays host to the Bank of America building, albeit short and wide, Centennial Olympic Park, the former site of the World of Coca-Cola building, unlicensed in-game, SunTrust Plaza, and of course the Capitol building. Atlanta is the capital of Georgia. Oakland Cemetery is also featured, with players being able to drive through it and topple some headstones. That's disrespectful. If you're looking for the Atlanta Braves, you sadly won't find Old Turner Field here. Nor will you find the Georgia Dome. And now you won't find either of these in real life since they've both been demolished and replaced. The outlines of the two maps, if determined by the road structure, are very similar. I'd estimate Atlanta to be like 40% of the size of downtown. Atlanta does a good job of evoking the general feel of the city due to its identical outline and building placement in downtown. Just make sure you've got wings. Hey, it's a city I've actually been to! The third city in the base game is Detroit, home of the Lions. I might be a little biased here simply due to proximity, so I'll try to keep things consistent with the other featured cities. Inside Motown, you'll see places such as Renaissance Center, the People Mover, Huntington Place or Cobo Center, Comerica Park, Ford Field, and the former Joe Louis Arena before its 2019 demolition. Detroit's got all the sports, albeit inconsistent at best back in 2005, and mostly garbage if owned by the Ilitch family. Sadly, just like the first Midnight Club, you can't go onto the Ambassador Bridge. Then again, why go to Canada, eh? You also can't drive to Belle Isle, which was a big missed opportunity to bring a real racing course into the game. They probably didn't have enough space either for the dual-layer DVD or console memory to put it in. This version of Detroit seems to be set during the winter, as when it precipitates, it snows. As someone from Michigan, we have a love-hate relationship with winter. It doesn't make things any more slippery. In fact, it only hinders handling as much as a rainstorm near the equator. Tweaked for the sake of gameplay is the location of the River Rouge. The real river and its drawbridges are located further southwest of downtown than what's in the game. If we take that discrepancy into account, the size of Detroit in MC3 is about 20% the size of the real deal. This is still unmistakably Detroit, even if the run-down part of town is a bit too close for comfort. Thankfully, it replicates the fact that there's still no South Detroit because it's in Lake Superior. Journey are a bunch of liars. By the way, a quick refresher, Dub Edition Remix features the Tokyo map from Midnight Club 2 in a standalone campaign. Lastly, we return to a familiar setting. Even though we've seen LA before, this version of Los Angeles is a bit different than you remember. It's big. It's at least 3 times as big as any city in Midnight Club up to this point. It's a map size that could rival GTA 3 or GTA 4. This version of LA still has most of the landmarks mentioned back in MC2, but now features more areas, including one of the missing sports stadiums. I'm of course referring to the site formerly known as Staples Center. Plus, now you can get her living in Beverly Hills, since Beverly Hills can now be explored. Also available to explore is Santa Monica and Venice Beach, although they're located much further away from the city center in real life than what's in the game. But things get even more interesting when we get to San Andreas, South Central, excuse me. The South Central expansion of the game's map is much more of a hodgepodge than even MC2's LA, because I know the LA Memorial Coliseum isn't supposed to be that close to downtown LA, or even directly south of town. Now, I don't claim to be a geography expert, but it doesn't take a genius to compare maps and see something's off. While we're here, in spite of the larger map size, the new LA is more of a 40% approximation than the 20% of the fictional city of LA in MC2. But this version of LA is able to capture more of the essence of the City of Angels, especially with how the city center is represented. Supposedly, one game reviewer back in 08 claimed they were able to find their way to different parts of the city thanks to this game. While I can't back up that claim, the focus on one city allowed Rockstar San Diego to squeeze in more detail than 2 or 3 maps would. The new LA inched closer to the real deal, and served as a taste of things to come with the eventual release of GTA 5 years later. Oh, and in case you were curious, Midnight Club LA Remix for PSP used a tweaked version of the LA map from MC2, as well as Tokyo. It's always interesting to see how game developers put their own spin on real-world places. For Rockstar San Diego and the Midnight Club series, it was all about seeing how much detail they could cram into a reduced-scale version of a real city. Some maps fared better than others, but they all succeeded in replicating the vibes of their real counterparts. Out of all the maps in the series, I think Midnight Club Los Angeles did the best scaled approximation with its sole focus on LA. That said, being able to navigate any of these cities IRL using these maps as reference may yield mixed results. At the very least, you'll know what city you're in. Have you been to any of these cities in real life, or do you live in any of these cities? Or do you just want to be one of the many people to parrot Midnight Club still cancelled, Saz? Leave a comment below. Until next time, I leave you with this. At the time I'm finishing this video, there is currently a series of large wildfires burning in the greater Los Angeles area. I was originally going to finish this video with a travel challenge, but in light of the recent fire, I thought that simply wasn't appropriate. The combined damage from all the fires surpassed that of the 2008 Sayre fire, with thousands of structures destroyed and a handful of people dead. So, if you can help, please do. I urge you to make a charitable contribution to anyone and everyone who's been affected by the fires. They need help now more than ever. Thank you. And tell them Squiddy sent you.